Join us on a journey deep into America's primordial river, a dark place where time stands still and man has hardly touched.
This black water will get into your blood. It will get in your veins.
The Swanee. Immortalized in song, it's a journey through untamed wilderness, from the boggy swamps of the Okefenokee.
I just love this closed-in canopy and the Spanish moss. It's just absolutely beautiful.
Through the upper Florida plains.
It's a really neat place. Today is a brilliant day for being out on the river.
Down an ancient escarpment and blowing through the coastal plains of Florida.
This is the best office in the world right here.
Into the shallow estuaries of the Gulf of Mexico. We meet the people who work, live, and play in this river.
It's huge.
All right.
Maybe it's better.
We go down upon the Swanee River, one of the most scenic rivers in the world. The Swanee starts its 230-mile journey in the swamps of southern Georgia. Formed by what was once an ancient estuary, it's now what is known as a black water swamp, its dark waters stained by the tannins of the decomposing and diluting vegetation.
The Okefenokee Swamp is almost entirely the headwaters of the Swanee watershed. Okefenokee is the largest ecologically intact swamp in North America. It's one of the largest in the world. Okefenokee is a peat-based wetland. There's no mud here. The whole bottom of the swamp is built on organic material, and the tannic acids give this water this color.
The water is black, so people think it's dirty, but it's not.
Joy and Chip Campbell are some of the very few people who live in this wilderness. They are conservation educators and outfitters who conduct tours of the Okefenokee. And with them as our guides, we get a look at the gems and hidden spots only insiders know.
Chip and I are swamp people. There are beach people. There are mountain people. We are swamp people. That's who we are. We are swamp people.
They may live in a swamp in the middle of nowhere now, but their origins are distinctly urban.
I was born in Brooklyn, New York. I went to school at North Carolina State University because I wanted to major in wildlife biology. And there I met Chip, who's now my husband.
I worked on the IT staff of the Research Institute. Joy worked for a survey research division. She knew that I came down here and that I'd been coming down here all of my life. Maybe it was just my boyish charm that led her to agree to come down here with me.
It was just the most incredible thing ever. Right then at that moment, it like got in my blood.
And so Chip and Joy packed up their big city jobs and moved with their children from North Carolina to southern Georgia and have never looked back.
One of the largest wilderness areas in the eastern United States. There are other blackwater swamps in the world, but here in North America, Okefenokee is the queen mother of the bunch. When you get into this area, you've got more of this deep, dark swamp. A lot of people's mind's eye, when they think of Okefenokee, you know, they think of that heart of darkness. And we've got that.
I just love this closed-in canopy and the Spanish moss. It's just absolutely beautiful and breathtaking.
Much of the beauty of this vast swamp lies in its dark waters. The water lacks oxygen, which means there is little bacteria to break down the vegetation. And that has a rather odd effect on the plant life. Unlike other soils, there is little nitrogen or phosphorus that plants need to survive. So what do? They become flesh eaters, trapping insects and dissolving them for the elements they need. And they are not the only flesh eaters around here. The swamp is also home to around 13,000 of these things. Alligators. Not that that worries Chip. It's why he loves the place.
This is a great place to see alligators, wading birds, sandhill cranes, especially during the winter when we get some migratory birds. You know, this black water will get into your blood. It will get in your veins. I won't say it'll do it with everybody, but it certainly did mine.
Chip and I are both very, very passionate about the Okefenokee Swamp. For me, it's the peace, it's the quiet. It's being in a place that you feel like you're out in the middle of absolutely nowhere.
The Swanee emerges from the swamp to head southwest towards the Gulf of Mexico. As we follow its waters, we'll take the rapids at Big Shoals, artfully weld the waterway in White Springs, see a most unusual wreck, come close to creatures who make this river their home, blast through the shallow waters of the estuary, before ending our journey with tasty seaside treats in the Gulf of Mexico. Forming from the dark swamp, the Swanee River meanders through the ancient hunting grounds of the Tamawaka Indian civilization. For its length, it flows as it always has, untouched by any dams and through lands as remote as anything you'd find in the Arctic or the Amazon. And soon we come to one of the most dangerous rapids in the country.
If you turn over in those, you could get cut and scratched up and banged up pretty well. I like this section of the Swanee River because I can count the number of houses and the development on both hands. It's kind of like the old Florida. It's very natural, very scenic and primitive.
Edwin McCook is a fourth-generation North Floridian. His job is to make sure the river remains as primitive as possible.
I love the river. I mean, it's part of my life. And because of my job, I get to advise people on how to enjoy the river, and it's just in my blood.
As a lifelong river lover, Edwin has seen this river do some very odd things. For starters, don't be fooled by the apparently lazy river. Edwin sees up close just how unusually the Swanee actually behaves.
The upper part of the Swanee River, I've seen it rise a foot an hour. I've also seen it fall a foot a day. The river changes almost daily, and it changes around every bend that you go around.
One of the most abrupt changes on the entire river is just around the bend. Big Shoals, one of the most dangerous rapids in America.
Big Shoals is where the Cody Escarpment crosses the Swanee River. Big Shoals is about 1,500 feet in length.
The rapids are not entirely off limits to kayakers, but Edwin does warn against the less experienced having a crack at them.
The limestone there is very sharp and it's very jagged. If you turn over in those, you could get cut and scratched up and banged up pretty well.
Now is a good time to grab your fishing rod and bait, because at the bottom end of Big Shoals, we meet a recently retired park ranger who knows the best spot to catch catfish.
My name is Gary Erickson. I was a park ranger here for about 30 years on the Swanee Rivers. When the water's low, I like to walk the riverbanks, and I also like to fish on the river.
100 years ago, this stretch of the river almost got tamed, becoming the center of a logging and turpentine industry that flared up for a few short years.
Passing by the river and the land around me. Mainly the history around it, because this goes back to 1835, and there's all kind of stuff went on this river over the years. Back in the early 19th century, they were doing logging on the river. They would cut logs up north and float them down the river. These were logs that was cut in Georgia, floated down the river from the turpentine industry. And if you know what turpentine industry is, that's where they got the gum out of the trees to make rosin and turpentine.
At one time, turpentine was the key ingredient in many paints and varnishes, and was obtained by cutting V-shaped grooves into the trunks of the pine trees that grew along the banks of the river. At its peak in the 1900s, 27,000 Floridians worked in the industry. But by the 1950s, thanks to modern chemicals, it had all but disappeared, and the Swanee became wild as it has always been. We float on further and leave the rougher waters behind. 5 miles downstream from Gary's favourite fishing spot, we come to the first proper town on the Swanee, White Springs, an area filled with attractions. Once, this was the Disneyland of its day. Thousands of holidaymakers flocked to bathe in the Sulphur Springs. Visitors included Presidents Taft and Roosevelt. But as with so much on the Swanee, it was an industry that did not last. The springs dried up in the 1930s and the presidents stopped coming. Recent statewide initiatives, including land purchases and changes to land use laws, are part of the growing effort to restore and save springs throughout the state of Florida. But the Swanee lives on, and it's what draws people to White Springs today. But with the river full of alligators, few come to swim in these black waters. Instead, they come to paddle on top of them. Keeping them safe is a small army of park managers like Jennifer and Andrea, our guides for this next section of our journey.
I love this river. I've been working on the river since 2013. If you start watching the river and feeling and getting to know it, it's a really neat place.
It's beautiful, and you always see something different. And the river changes almost daily.
Today, the Swanee looks serene, but it's not always the case.
This is actually a really good height for paddling. There are times when it can get much lower, and so that you'll start hitting areas where you have to portage. Sometimes it gets so high that we don't allow people to launch into the river because it becomes unsafe for recreation. Today's a really good day. Today is a brilliant day for being out on the river.
Nailed it.
Andrea and Jennifer are both from North Florida, but neither had been to the Swanee in their youth. Once they came, they were hooked.
I really had never been to the Swanee until I came back from being in the military. I did 20 years in the Navy, so I wanted to come home to be with my family. And I always wanted to be a park ranger.
I've lived in Georgia, I've lived in Ohio, I've lived in Kentucky. Coming back to Florida, it was sort of like I brought all my favorite places together in one place, and it just happened to be here. So I got extremely lucky, and I'm very grateful. It is a very magical area. It's steeped in a lot of lore and a lot of mystery. You really want to find out the secrets of the river, but then again, you really don't, because you're okay with them being a secret.
It's odd that this secret river is perhaps one of the most famous in the world, and all because of a song that's been recorded by almost 300 separate artists. Old Folks at Home, or as it's often called, Way Down Upon the Swanee River, was written in 1851 by Stephen Foster.
Because people hear the song, they wonder where the river is, and then they find out that there are these opportunities to go down the river. And it does draw people from all over the world. And I think that the song has quite a bit to do with that.
Just to make sure people weren't disappointed after journeying hundreds of miles to see the river, the park authorities decided to build an entire museum dedicated to the song, complete with a nice big bell tower so you just can't miss it.
Stephen Foster was the first professional songwriter, and he was America's, well, most popular. I mean, he has over 200 songs. Anyone from Camptown Races, because everybody knows the Doo-Dah Doo-Dah song, to Way Down Upon the Swanee River, to Oh Susanna. I mean, he had a ton of different songs that still play in movies today.
Not bad for a local boy from the sticks. Only
He never visited the Swanee.
yep. The man who made the Swanee River famous the world over never so much as dipped his big toe in its waters. He was a Pittsburgh boy, living some 1,000 miles to the north. In fact, you could argue that his brother Morrison is just as responsible for the Swanee's worldwide fame.
Morrison had suggested the Yazoo River. Stephen actually said, "Psh, I'm not gonna have that." So they basically put the atlas out on the desk, looked at all these different rivers, and they found Swanee.
One thing you have to agree on, Floridians know a hit when they hear it. In 1931, they dumped their old state song, the venerable Florida, My Florida, promoted Old Folks Back Home as the new state song, and threw in a state park for good measure. Given the role music has played in the Swanee's notoriety, artists of many kinds have long been drawn to the Swanee.
The Swanee River is ever-changing as you progress along it.
The picturesque beauty of the river can stir creativity and ignite the artistic spirit. Anne Opgenorth, a well-known artist in White Springs, came to work in these parts 25 years ago to escape the winters of Wisconsin.
Are you kidding? It's like died and gone to heaven. It's beautiful. The scenery, the wildlife. It's magic. It absolutely is magic. The Swanee has beautiful reflections because the water is dark. When the sky is reflected, it's very bright on the far shore, but as it comes closer to you, the blue really deepens because of that tannic acid in the river. The varied foliage, the varied plant life that's here. Being originally a Midwesterner, the palms, all of the palms are just the biggest treat in the world to me. All of these things are found in my paintings all year long.
In addition to being a painter, Anne is known for making unusual sculptures, welding metals into shapes and likenesses.
When I went to college, I started doing watercolors because I had no formal art training until I went to college. As I progressed through the art department, we had sculpture class. And in my advanced sculpture class, I learned to weld. And then that was really it for me. The Swanee River absolutely inspires my art. I don't think, I used to paint things like farm scenes when I lived in the Midwest, or weld things that were of the Midwest, but now everything comes from the Swanee. I live in the most beautiful place in the world, and I have it to go look at anytime I feel like it. I walk down there and just take a deep breath.
The dark colors and shades of the Swanee are there for anyone to be inspired by, but even those change. We travel 40 miles downstream to an area called Troy Springs. Just off the Swanee, it's the world's largest concentration of freshwater springs. There are so many springs here that something incredible happens to the black water.
The river is a dark tea-colored, and the springs are crystal clear, just like a glass of water. Right now, the water level is going down, so more of the river is made up by the spring water, so it actually can clear up. And during times of drought, it can get very clear.
This is Bill Foote, a long-time resident here and expert diver. He makes the most of the mysterious river's clear water season, and as he keeps an eye out for alligators, is about to take us through the most unusual underwater formations.
Excited to get into the water?
I'm very excited to get into the water. We are fortunate to be in North Florida, where we have the very best spring diving around. And it's unique to this part of the country because of the karst geology that we have and the rain cycle that occurs produce these wonderful dive sites. I grew up in Jacksonville. It's just a stone's throw from the Swanee River area. So I've been diving in the springs of North Florida for 50 years.
The source of springs usually comes from waters below the earth. These clear waters fall from the sky. The Gulf Stream brings plenty of rainfall, which filters down into the limestone topography. The sheer volume of slowly filtering water erodes the limestone and creates caves. This is called a karst environment. The rainwater pours through and out of the karst limestone, creating caves large enough to dive in. And during the low water level season, this stretch of the Swanee turns from being black to clear. Which means we are able to see a most unusual sight in the now clear waters of the Swanee, the skeleton of a shipwreck from long ago.
The Madison was a side wheel paddle wheeler, about 100 feet long, and operated up and down the Swanee River as a general store, delivering supplies and goods, and it was the Walmart of its day.
Back in the 1850s, with few roads, rivers like the Swanee were the main transport routes. Paddle steamers like the Madison were the container ships of the day. She was built in 1850 by James M. Tucker, who worked her up and down the river for almost a decade. But then in 1861, America split in two, with Florida joining the rest of the southern states in a civil war over the issue of slavery. Right at the outset of the war, Tucker signed up to fight in the Confederate Army against the Union Army of the North.
It gives you some insight as to their passion of what was occurring in the 1850s, 1860s. How strong people felt for him to sink his livelihood and go fight in a war. As Northern troops advanced farther south, James Tucker, who was the captain of Madison, he was concerned that the Madison would fall into the hands of the Union Army.
Florida's main role in the war was as a source of cattle and other food supplies for the Confederacy. Left in the hands of 3 trusted men, the Madison was soon being used to transport supplies upriver to the Confederate Army fighting further north. But then the war turned in favor of the Union. The fate of the Madison became a matter of grave concern. Believing it was their only option, Tucker's men sank her. Some say they hoped to salvage her later, but if so, it never happened. For over 160 years, she's been gradually rotting away on the bottom of the Swanee River. The fallout of the disastrous Civil War contributes to why the Swanee kept to its primordial state. The Reconstruction of the South drove this area into economic despair, and the people here moved away. Traveling another 45 miles downstream, we are about to meet some bottom dwellers who've been here a lot longer than the Madison. Millions of years, in fact. "45 miles down the lazy river, we visit with Dr. Travis Thomas and his very old, very large, very unique friends.
I'm a researcher and a biologist at the Nature Coast Biological Station at the University of Florida, and I do a lot of work on the Swanee alligator snapping turtle.
Big fella.
The alligator snapping turtles are the largest freshwater turtles in the Western Hemisphere, found only in this river.
It's 46 kilograms, which is 105 pounds.
They can get up to 165 pounds. It's a big boy.
We got it? I think so. Good God, that thing's huge. All right.
It looks better. They eat just about anything they can find in the river.
There you go, he's let go. Nope, just leave it like that.
They've been around for millions and millions of years. They have big keeled shells, big spikes on their shells.
426 and 568.
They have enormous heads with powerful jaws.
138.
They're very ferocious looking, very prehistoric looking. Big claws for clawing on the bottom of the river, making their way around and foraging on the banks.
If the idea of getting your foot nipped by an alligator turtle, or worse, an actual alligator biting your leg, isn't enough to put you off a dip in the inky black of the Swanee, let's introduce you to another monster lurking in its depths. This is the Gulf sturgeon. They live along the northeast corner of the Gulf of Mexico, and a majority of them come up the Swanee. Along with the alligator snapping turtle, the Gulf sturgeon makes the primordial nature of the Swanee come to life and flesh. For it has been here since the age of the dinosaurs. But this is one Swanee monster you won't get bitten by, because when they are in the river, as opposed to the Gulf, they don't eat. But that does not mean they won't hurt you. Why? Because they have a habit of jumping around 8 feet into the air. This bizarre trait results in around 10 injuries a year as they crash down onto unsuspecting boaters. They were once fished for their caviar and flesh, but this was stopped about 30 years ago when they were declared endangered. Nowadays, scientists catch, weigh, measure and tag the sturgeons in an effort to track their population, and it appears to be a success. In fact, scientists estimate that the Swanee's very own breed of sturgeon numbers nearly 10,000. But there is one species in the Swanee that almost definitely won't hurt you. And we'll find it 25 miles downstream from here at a very special spring. Once again, we encounter clear waters, but none have been quite like this. The wonderful Manatee Spring Park.
The water itself in the river is brown. And then it's just like you go across the threshold and it's this beautiful crystal clear water. The contrast is amazing. It's like two different worlds.
Paul has lived in Florida all his life. He brings many adventurers along these lower Swanee waters to see all that awaits the curious explorer, and the Manatee Springs are, clearly, a favorite. This is the largest and most beautiful aquifer spring on the Swanee. It's the only spring to pour an astonishing 1 million gallons of water each day into the Swanee. And the wildlife here joins in the fun.
We can expect to see alligators, turtles, a variety of birds.
But the real stars here are those that give these springs their name. The large, slow, curious, and lovable manatee. These adored and gentle beasts grow to as big as 8 feet in size and survive in warmer waters. Just looking at them, you can see why they have the nickname the sea cow. But their closest relative is, in fact, the elephant.
Manatees are subtropic aquatic mammals, so contrary to popular belief, they don't have any blubber. They're actually a very lean animal. So during the summer, they're going to want to be on the Gulf side where the water's really warm. Now, as the Gulf temperatures cool down, they seek refuge in the springs because the springs are 72 degrees all year round, no matter what the outside temperature is. In the summertime, they don't worry about it as much because they don't want to be as cool, but that's their refuge.
One of the extraordinary adaptations of the manatee is that they are able to swim in both salt and fresh waters. This is as far north as the West Indies species of manatee ever go, but they return every autumn and are the Swanee's most anticipated creature. "20 miles further on, we come to where the manatees enter the Swanee, the delta estuaries, where salt water mixes with the black freshwater. These vast, broad, marshy wetlands are a patchwork of tidal creeks and deeper river gullets, full of oysters, birds, fish, and bursting with unique grasses and vegetation.
The Swanee is awesome. It brings so much life to this area.
And it's here where we encounter something that can only be described as pure Florida. One simply cannot come here without a ride in one of these.
As long as we've got mud to slide across, we can get to places. The airboat's the best way to get around in here. My name's Captain Denny Voiles. I'm a retired school teacher, and I'm now a fishing guide in Cedar Key all the way to the Swanee River.
Dennis is also a master captain in the US Coast Guard, and as you can see here, an expert airboat pilot. Yes, an airboat operator can also be called a pilot.
Our tides go from 4 feet to 0, and at low tide, it's hard to get around back here in any other kind of boat, so the airboat is perfect. You can actually go over the mud if we need to, but when it gets real shallow, we can still navigate back in the tidal creeks and estuaries.
These amphibious vehicles have flat bottoms and use a rear-mounted fan for power rather than an outboard motor.
Here's how an airboat works. It's one direction, forward. You don't have any reverse. It's a big engine that has 4 propellers, some have 3, some have 2. And we just push air to move the boat forward.
Today, the airboat is synonymous with Florida. Many think it was invented here, but in fact, the first airboat was made by none other than the inventor of the telephone, Alexander Graham Bell. He built the first airboat to test military engines in Nova Scotia, Canada. But Florida did popularize them largely in the south, in the Everglades. Here in Cedar Keys, the water, landscape, and work that Dennis does brings him palpable joy.
This is the best office in the world right here. It's so nice. Every day is different. Different birds, different dolphins. It's just such a beautiful, unique ecosystem, and it's a wonderful place to just be out there.
And with the wind in our hair, we come to the brackish waters of the Swanee as it meets the Gulf of Mexico. Here, we get knee-high into the water and go digging for dinner.
There they are, all nice, ready to go. Perfect, guys. What we're doing is we have these bags and lines, just like if you could imagine like a crop in a field, just rows. That's exactly what we do.
These are aqua farms that grow the northern quahog clams. They are farmed throughout the year.
So we're gonna lay these bags on the bottom, and the stakes will stick down in the soil, and we work from the east to the west. So we'll run the bags out in rows of 120. So Dylan will hold the boat while Luke and I, stake them down. The Swanee River is just the perfect mix as the tides come and go with the brackish water mixing with the salt water that provides essentially an amazing place to grow shellfish.
Heath Davis was born and raised on the island of Cedar Key, where the Swanee's flow says goodbye in a glorious delta. Few can claim as close a relationship with the Swanee as Heath.
One of the neat stories about my family, they were in Georgia, and they had a little cabin. They took the cabin and they turned it into a raft, and they migrated down the Swanee River. He ended up to the mouth, and they settled right here near Cedar Key. It's neat to think back, even today, as I travel to Swanee, about my ancestors, coming down this beautiful river that's unrestricted, that's all natural.
Now, Heath is mayor of Cedar Key. For 8 generations, his family have fished and harvested oysters.
But anyway, after we pull these off, give me a little alleyway right there. We're going to that pipe. We've laid 2 rolls down in a line, and so we'll work to where they are down there.
He is the first in his long family line to farm clams.
Shellfish typically grow where water tides mix. We're on a bank that runs quite a distance, and the island's part of that bank. And a long time ago, vegetation grew on it. So behind me, before you get to the mainland, you have a deep slough. And then behind where you guys are sitting, there's a deep slough in front of me. And so this is the perfect place for shellfish.
The quahog clam is not actually native to this area of the Gulf. They come from the Atlantic coast. But the Swanee River outflow into the Gulf is the perfect spot for a quahog clam farm.
They've been here now for about 12 months. You can see that the nice white ring means that he's growing real well. Pulling them with the winch, we wash them off, get them real good and clean. And there they are, all nice, ready to go. Swanee River, it's almost like when you're in school and you learn about your organs. You know, your heart pumps blood and, you know, pumps blood throughout your body, and, you know, that's how it takes care of you. Well, that's how the Swanee River does to us. It takes care of us.
And so the Swanee unfurls into the sea, and in striking style. NASA snapped and enhanced this photo of how the Swanee's black waters interact with the sea. A most magnificent end to our journey, way down upon the Swanee River. From the headwaters of the Okefenokee, across the upper Florida plains, down the rapids of Big Shoals, through the springs that turn these dark waters clear, aboard a boat that puts the air in estuary, and on to be engulfed. We have met the southern souls who make this place their home, seen magnificent creatures, and beheld largely untouched banks that are the mark of one of America's most wild rivers. As the opening line in the song that made it famous says, "Way down upon the Swanee River, far, far away, that is where my heart is yearning ever. Home, where the old folks stay."
Gorgeous stuff. The Home Guard are back on duty tomorrow night. Just Don't Tell Him Pike, Dad's Army, all the laughs and more at 8:30. Next this evening, take the ferry or maybe the hovercraft to walk more of coastal Britain with Kate Humble. Remember, coloured sand may only be obtained from the gift shop.